In May of 2014, our cameras traveled to San Diego, California, and to the Jesuit Church of Our Lady of Guadalupe, there to interview three of the founding members of Holy Trinity's sister parish in El Salvador, Maria Madre de los Pobres. The three pioneers had come together to reminisce at the time when the two sister parishes were about to celebrate 25 years of accompaniment. Joe Owen, then a Holy Trinity parishioner, helped organize that first trip. Jim Mayer, then Holy Trinity's pastor, led the group. He was later called to secular life. Peter Gyves, then a medical doctor, had become a Jesuit priest and the parochial vicar of this parish near the U.S.-Mexican border. The three agreed to share their thoughts about this reunion and their recollections about that initial trip. In this video, we will hear from Father Peter Gyves. Father Peter, will you share with us some of the details of that patio reunion that you just enjoyed with your colleagues from that first trip to Maria Madre?
Yeah, I think number one, I hadn't seen Jim in 20 years or more. We talked on the phone somewhere between 20 and 25 years ago, but not since. I've been kept up to date with where he is by Joe, and Joe I have had good contact with. But I think, what really struck me was 25 years have gone by and how fast it's gone by, and we're all same people, but we're different people. And I think what I learned for myself and for both Joe and Jim is that, in many ways all of our lives were transformed by that experience there at that time together. Really an amazing, amazing time among an amazing group of people, the Salvadoran people.
What are your first recollections of that trip? What stands out in your mind?
Yeah, I think for myself, as I've said maybe before, I went down there with the best of intentions. I went down there knowing that I was very sympathetic to the poor in the midst of a civil war. And I've mentioned before that this idea of what hit me was this image of an iceberg that over time when I realized was that what you saw and what was being discussed publicly was the tip of an iceberg, maybe 10% of the complexity of what was really occurring. And you don't know that at the first moment you're there, but after a while, we had a person with us, Lydia, who was Cuban by birth, who understood, her Spanish was good enough, obviously, to understand a lot more of what was really going on than the rest of us who were struggling with our Spanish. My Spanish changed over time, but at the beginning there, I realized that this was much more complex of a situation than I had ever even imagined.
Complex for you and complex for the people of Maria Madre.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. No, wonderful, wonderful people.
What was their physical condition at the time, as you now recall it, 25 years later? What did you encounter in their lives?
Yeah. I think, utter poverty. I think I've talked about to people in subsequent years that people during that time and people at Madre de los Pobres, that was a repopulated area. These people came from the countryside, squatted on land in a ravine that became Madre de los Pobres. And they were poor. That's what they had in common. They were people who had nothing. They lived in tin huts and mud shacks is for the most part what we saw. And what struck me then, and I've never forgotten, was the idea that in this country, for middle class people and up, a dog would live under a roof, would have food, would have a veterinarian. These people had none of the above. They did not eat meat. Chicken was a rarity. And what I was exposed to when I finally went to live there was beans and rice 3 times a day, 7 days a week. Monotonous diet, and a diet that I really was not prepared to be able to handle. So utter poverty, but people with a tremendous spirit of faith. And that's something that grew for me. I did not understand their faith initially, that I could not understand how people who were so oppressed, so poor, could have this very strong, deep conviction of faith in a God who was with them, accompanying them in this struggle they were in. It didn't make sense to me. It did after a while, but it took a while for me to really grasp that.
Then, After that first delegation, you went back to El Salvador and to Maria Madre. What motivated that decision?
Yeah, well, I was looking in my own personal life, independent of any of this. I had reached a crossroads where I was looking for something more. I was very happy with what I did in my medical career, but I knew that there was something missing for me, and I think ultimately what it was to be exposed to the poor of the world, wherever that might be. And I had made a decision that I wanted to go and live in Latin America. And at the time, Holy Trinity was beginning. I had seen in the bulletin, I think the week before, that I was really coming to this kind of an understanding of my own self, that they were beginning a sister parish relationship. And I asked Jim Mayer, who was the pastor at the time, would it be possible to go down with them on a delegation that was leaving in 2 weeks? And lo and behold, I went to a meeting and it all happened, and I went down. And I went back because I wanted to offer what medical skills I had to people I knew who had nothing. They did not have medical care. And initially it was in that parish, but it expanded from there up into the conflictive zones in Chalatenango, which is 2 hours north of the capital city of San Salvador.
What did you do there? What was your life like?
Yeah, well, initially in the parish, I was in their clinic. The parish had a small clinic where they had supplies, medical supplies, antibiotics, basic antibiotics, nothing very sophisticated. The advantage for me was that about 50% of the population of Salvador, it was about under 15 years of age. So most of the people I was seeing were of pediatric age, and I was very comfortable with that, being able to handle that. Most of the healthcare was fairly simple. It was gastrointestinal disease, a lot of diarrhea related to parasites, a lot of pulmonary disease related to asthma in the children. Because in these tin huts, they would cook, and there would be smoke. There was no proper ventilation and a lot of the kids had a lot of trouble with asthma. So dealing with a lot of that, and skin infections would be a big one too. So mostly that.
How long did you do that during your second time in El Salvador? How long were you there?
When I went back, I stayed in the country 3 years when I went back, finishing the war and probably 1 year of transition into peace. So it was the end of the war, but it was in the immediate after effect of the killing of the Jesuits. I arrived there with I think perhaps the first delegation of U.S. people to get into the country after the killing of the Jesuits, the offensive that occurred in November of 1989. I arrived there, I think within 6 weeks. The borders to the country were closed in the aftermath of that event. And I came into the country with, I believe, 3 or 4 other people. And that in itself was quite a story. That we arrived, we went into Guatemala, flew into Guatemala, and then we traveled into Salvador, because the borders by land were easier to get through, was the word we had heard. So we entered there, and we got to the parish, I'm guessing maybe 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, and we were fed and we went to bed. And the next morning, we were taken to the UCA, where the Jesuits had been killed. And I'll never forget, we were taken to the grassy knoll where they had been shot. The bodies were gone, the blood had dripped into the lawn, and everything was gone. It looked okay. But then they took us to the room where the 2 women were. And the women, obviously the bodies were gone, but those rooms had not been cleaned, and there was dried blood over the entire floor. And I remember, this is my entree into the country, just saying, how could this possibly have happened? It was a stunning experience for me, and one I never forgot. And I think my time in Salvador really goes from that point of being among the poor in the parish, and then beyond that to working in the countryside up in Chalatenango. And then at the end of a year, when my Spanish became good enough, of really studying theology. So I studied theology and worked among the poor in combination during the course of a week, and that was my life for 3 years.
You know, your study of theology must have given you insights into the ferment occurring in the church in those years, as the division arose between those who wished to embrace the preferential option for the poor and those who wished to cling to old ways.
Yeah, I think what was very interesting down there is you had a division of churches, and it wasn't Catholic versus Protestant. It was really more all denominations, be it Catholic, Protestant, had two really what they would call lineas, or two different ways or lines in which they proceeded. And one was a very traditional, the other was a very progressive. And it was very, there's great tension between the two. Both Catholics would have that, the Lutherans had it, the Episcopalians had it. And the beauty of what went on down there, at least for me, was that you had Lutheran, Episcopalian, Baptist, Catholic, progressive and traditional, and the progressives, of which more the UCA would have been a part of, really worked together. They combined resources to work in areas to provide for the poor, in a way to try and work for justice for the people. The more traditional aspect of that would have been much more church-oriented and more traditionally oriented, of coming to church during the week or on Sunday, and less activity in society itself.
So 25 years ago, you were a doctor in El Salvador, and now you're a Jesuit priest in San Diego. A lot of movement.
Yeah, there's been a lot of movement, yeah. Well, I think for me it's been a constant evolution, you know, and I think when I was in El Salvador, I didn't realize it at the time, but I did Jesuit formation during my years in El Salvador. I studied theology, and I did what Jesuits call experiments. I mean, I was in the conflictive zones providing health care to the people in need, and then coming back in a systematic way, reflecting on it theologically. It was a powerful experience. I remember I went to John Sobrino, who's a theologian in El Salvador and would be one of the better known theologians in Latin America. And I asked him once, I said, what do you think of a physician who would come down to the country and tell you that he not only wants to provide care to the people, but he wants to take some time to study theology? And he said, I think it's a wonderful idea, because he said, you're going to have an experience that nobody else has had. You're going to experience firsthand the oppression of the people, the poverty of the people, the marginalization of the people, and at the same time, systematically reflect upon it from a theological or biblical perspective. And I think that is true, and I think that is part of, those were the seeds that I think changed my life. Exposure to the people, the faith of the people, reflecting on it in a very, perhaps sophisticated theological way down there, and the example of the Jesuits that I knew from down there. Now, some of them obviously had been killed. 6 Jesuits were killed. But John Sobrino was a tremendous influence on me, a man who had a tremendous option for the poor, who spoke out. I was at conferences where he spoke very bluntly. I have read a fair amount of what Ignacio Ellacuría, who was the president of the university and the target of the assassinations. And I think I came back to this country for 2 reasons. One is it allowed me to study. I was offered scholarships to do public health and to do a theology degree, and that's why I came back. But I came back initially to go back to El Salvador with those degrees, and that didn't work out. I think the politics of the time made it a little bit difficult to do that. So I then spent 9 years in Baltimore, working in the inner city of Baltimore in 2 hospitals in Baltimore. And it was at the end of that time that at some point I just really saw clearly that I wanted to pursue this idea of social justice, option for the poor. I think more from within the Society of Jesus than without it. I think at that point I was living parallel to the society. I hadn't married. I was living very simply. And something happened where I think I just felt that I'd like to do this from within. It would give me a better opportunity to do what I really wanted to do.
And so you're here in San Diego in this very unique parish. Tell us about your ministry here.
Yeah, you know, I came out here, and this parish is about 99% Mexican descent, many undocumented people. We're within 5 to 10 miles of the border, so there's a lot of transit, legal and illegal, to come back and forth. We are the national church of the Mexican people, so that's a signal to the Mexican people that they can come here, and the masses are in Spanish. We have 2 masses every day, Monday to Saturday, and we have about 6 masses on Sunday. All but one of those masses during the week are in Spanish. The population here mostly Spanish speaking. There are some who are bilingual, but not a lot, and there are very few who are English speaking. So the parish, my role here in the parish is to plug into the regular chores of the parish, which includes baptisms and marriages and daily masses. My special role here has been to really start a social justice ministry, and we've begun that. I began that during Lent. I'm only here 5 months at this point, and began that during Lent, and we've had quite a response from both an English perspective and Spanish speaking. The Spanish speaking component of this is all from within the parish. There are people whose faith is a simple piety for the most part. They've not been exposed to the idea of social justice, yet most of these people have experienced tremendous injustice in their own lives. They're people of color, they're people who are poor, and in their own ways they've been discriminated against, they've been marginalized. So this message that I'm talking about of social justice resonates to them on an experiential level. The English-speaking component, what has surprised me, has come from outside the parish. We only have 1% population. Some of them are from the parish, but people from outside have begun to hear what we're doing, and they're coming in to be part of it. So it's a nice blend. We're getting people from both within and without the parish to really learn about a Jesuit perspective or an Ignatian spirituality perspective towards social justice. And we are hoping to continue this in a monthly meetings where we will continue to educate people and pray about what this means, and then to try to get people involved in action, to do something related to trying to better the people of this area. And big issues in this area are minimum wage. Most people here are underemployed, unemployed, and those who are employed, they're making minimum wage incomes, and many homes here would be single parent, and then they don't have the salaries to make it go, which would be common throughout the United States. So we're working on that. Another one, a big issue here would be immigration. You know, the idea of people moving back and forth. There are people being moved out of the country. We have a parishioner in this parish, a man who's been in this country working for 25 years, I believe, and he's being deported. He's married to I believe, a U.S. citizen, Mexican woman, or at least someone who has papers, I believe. She's okay, documentation-wise. He's got about 3 children, and they want to deport him. So the parish has mobilized to try and support him and see if they can get him, that movement of him out of the country deferred so that he can be with his children. And so those are things we're going to try to help people with here in the parish.
Father Peter, what would you say to a person who is considering a visit to our sister parish, but is reluctant, thinking that he or she lacks skills, not a doctor or an engineer, concerned that there would be nothing for him or her to contribute to the poor? Would you advise such a person to make the trip?
I think the answer is yes. I mean, it's a life-changing experience, or it was then, and I suspect it's the same. I was in the parish 2 years ago now, and it's still poor. The people are still wonderful. The people are people of tremendous faith. And I think that's the thing you experience there is, what is this faith that these people have that perhaps is different than we have? And I think for myself, what I discovered is that many people, including myself in this country, we have a faith that is oftentimes intellectually based. You know, we have an intellectual assent to faith. We believe Jesus. We believe Jesus was raised from the dead. We believe in the principles of Christianity. We believe, I think, too, in this idea of a greater God. There is a God who we believe will triumph over history, and will one day, God will be all in all, and the world will be as God wants it to be. I think that's maybe a simplistic but a real way that we have been brought up. I think down in El Salvador, what I discovered is, I think the people of El Salvador have an experiential faith that is far deeper than we have. They have a great need for God. Our lives run, many of us, we have jobs, we have education, we have things that make our lives go. We are probably less dependent upon God on a day-to-day basis. And as a result, we may not have the same closeness to God. These people are fully dependent upon God. They don't have jobs. Their lives are misery, and they are very needy. And what I discovered was this concept of a lesser God. These people, I think, in Salvador, at least during my time, and I suspect it's still the same, is that the God they experience is a God that doesn't win on a day-to-day basis. It's a God who was crucified in history in Jesus. Ignacio Ellacuría talked about this crucified God in history. And it was a God who was not only crucified once in Jesus, but it's a God who continues to be crucified every day in the lives of suffering people throughout the world. And I think it's that God these people are very much in touch with, that they can palpate. And that's the God I think you discover when you go to El Salvador. What I learned is I believe in the greater God who wins ultimately in history. But what I discovered in El Salvador was the lesser God who is in solidarity with these people still in El Salvador, who doesn't change their fate overnight, but walks with them in their struggle for liberation, for an opportunity to live a life that they can only dream about for the most part. So I think that's the value in going there, to discover this other aspect of who God really is in this history we live out.
Well, thanks very much, Father Peter, for this chat. It was during his time at Our Lady of Guadalupe Parish that Father Peter Gyves established A Faith That Does Justice, a national interfaith Jesuit ministry that raises consciousness about social issues affecting the most vulnerable among us. Today, its work continues and grows. Father Peter Gyves of the Society of Jesus died in Boston on August 7th, 2024, just weeks before his 73rd birthday. May he rest in peace.